What's up, you guys? Ross Sapp, managing editor, Fightful.com, FightfulMMA.com. We, of course, also have our premium service, FightfulSelect.com. It is the Fightful MMA podcast for October 23rd. We got plenty to talk about. I am joined by one Showdown Joe Ferraro. Joe, how are you?
Doing pretty good, guys. How you guys doing?
I'm doing splendid. It's a week without MMA. Well, UFC, Bellator, at least. We had PFL. We'll talk a little bit about that. But there's UFC up in Canada coming up soon. And our boy James Lynch has talked to several of the fighters, probably more fighters than anybody else in the MMA media game on this show. We're going to hear about some of that today. But James, how are you?
I'm doing well, and actually, it is true. I've interviewed more than any other outlets, so we got you covered over there as far as what's on Fightful right now, unless the stuff they get during Media Week. Just wanted to clarify that.
And I mean, you've already got stuff up for UFC Denver. I mean, my God, it's insane the level of coverage that we have, especially for those two events. So make sure you guys check that out. As I announced last week on this channel, actually, which this will soon be a pretty much Fightful wrestling channel. There has been a great shift in quite frankly, I think, attention in combat sports. We talked about it time and time again. I've got a column coming up on it next month. MMA and boxing are really, they've regained a lot of steam, especially this quarter. And last week I was looking at our content, and Carlos Toro has started to do almost a bi-weekly podcast, and his boxing newsletter has become one of the hottest things on our site. It is just a must read, whether you're a casual boxing fan or a hardcore boxing fan. James Lynch has interviews all the time. I'm going live more than ever. We have post shows, we have pre-shows, we have clips that go up, we have this podcast. So I decided to launch a Fightful MMA and boxing channel. We will have a custom URL as soon as YouTube allows. That'll be about 3 weeks. But I'm going to go live there very, very often. I've given Carlos Toro the green light. James Lynch's interviews will go up there immediately. The way that was set up, basically James would do an interview and I would have to fit them in. That way we didn't have like 5-6 videos going up at a time. That's going to happen on the new channel. They're going up immediately. We're going to have more coverage than ever before. Joe, I've mentioned this before, but you got Manny Pacquiao signing a big deal with PBC. You've got DAZN doing insane stuff with Canelo Alvarez and Bellator, UFC with ESPN, and then all of these guys are coming back. This seems like it's such a just a reinvigorating time for combat sports.
Yeah, it always happens. Seems to happen in cycles, right? Things go great for a while, then something happens, and then the negative stuff starts almost dominoing to the point where things are like, oh boy, now what's going to happen? Now the sport's going to take another downturn, and before you know it, guys come back, events, guys get signed, things are moving around. You're hearing stuff about ONE FC as well. Some other big signings are about to happen over there as well. So a bunch of things are happening in the MMA world, not just the UFC, but I think we're going to see, obviously with Jon Jones coming back, Conor McGregor being a little classier now with his posts or a post, and the ESPN deal going to be kicking in. I think we're going to see another pleasant resurgence of the MMA game for sure. I think we lost Sean's mic there.
Oh, yeah, did we? Yeah.
My apologies. I have uploaded a lot of our classic content over on the MMA channel. Some stuff that Joe did at UFC 210, a lot of the on-site interviews that James Lynch has done, some of the pros picks, all that stuff will be moving to the MMA channel. And I kind of weighed this with James and with Jimmy Van, with Melissa, people like that. I think it's the right move. I think what makes us unique also holds us back a little bit, because you can get all the same content. All you got to do is hit the subscribe button. But right now, James Lynch, the most popular live video I've done thus far is about Chris Cyborg offering to train Danielle Bergoli, a.k.a. the Catch Me Outside girl. That's where we are in MMA. That's where we are.
Yeah. Gotta get those clicks. I mean, people like that stuff. It's we talk about this all the time with the sport. I mean, there is the tabloid part of the sport that I think people like to, see that type of stuff, and you have to cover it. You do. People hate it, but people also watch it. So the people who say they hate it, you're probably watching it too.
Also, shout outs to Bellator, who send me highlights of their show just so they can copyright claim them. And then I get people from Combate Americas tweeting me saying, "You got set up," which I thought was funny. But you will see those videos after I clear this horse shit with Viacom. You'll see videos like that. You'll see event videos. If you all have videos to send in, you'll see those. James Lynch's interviews, pros picks. And really, James, your pros picks have gone far beyond pros picks. You do all kinds of fighter reactions now, which I love. I think those are great.
Yeah, I got another one coming out next week. I think I mentioned this on the show last week. My laptop died. Found out my laptop's going to be delivered back tomorrow. Praying the data's still on there. If it's on there, I got a bunch of really cool stuff coming out for that series. One asking fighters what they would be doing for a career if they weren't fighting, which I got some really interesting answers on that. And
of course, James Lynch has interviews with everybody from like UFC, the people who are going to debut in the UFC, to top stars. We had Chris Weidman drop this week or last week, just ahead of his fight being changed, of course. Joe is all over the globe. When he gets content, we post that as well. And then clips from this. I have workout videos for Gamboa ahead of his fight with Miguel Beltran. And Carlos Toro, like I said, has been given a green light to go live whenever he wants on this channel. This was a big part of my decision as well, is the fact that James Lynch, quite frankly, I think is the best video interviewer in MMA. We got Showdown Joe, one of the best MMA analysts, period. And we got Carlos Toro, who is just burst onto the boxing media scene over the past 2.5 years and just taken it by storm and done some really incredible stuff. I wanted a platform that could highlight him more as well. So very excited about this, if you guys couldn't tell. We will be pushing it very hard. For now, the podcasts are going to stay on this channel because of the subscriber count and all that. The fight reviews will stay on this channel, but eventually they will be moved over to the MMA and boxing channel. So hit that subscribe button, my friends. Also, we're expanding our MMA content on Fightful Select as well, but enough of the plugs. We'll talk more about this and some of the behind the scenes that goes into that as we go on. Khabib is still in the news, guys, because Floyd Mayweather claims that he wants to fight Khabib. And we've had some real weird takes on this, like Michael Bisping saying that he thinks that Khabib could go the distance. First off, let's hit that one. First, that fight ain't happening. I said that about the Floyd Mayweather-Conor McGregor fight too. But this fight ain't happening, James.
No. I'm with you here. Khabib, as much as people want to think Khabib is, all of a sudden this A-side fighter, he's not. Conor McGregor is a completely different animal than Khabib in terms of the self-promotion and everything like that. I just don't think it's a fight that people want to see as much as they wanted to see McGregor, especially because McGregor's known for his knockout power. Khabib known more of a grappler. I know he dropped McGregor in their fight, but to me, I don't think this happens. I think this is a lot of smoke. I think this is a lot of, just Khabib trying to keep his, name in there. And also Floyd, obviously, because Floyd's not doing anything right now. So why not, call out a UFC champion or respond to a UFC champion? But I don't think this will happen. I mean, Conor McGregor's one thing that this guy is, kind of redefined self-promotion in MMA, but Khabib is not on anywhere near that level in terms of the self-promotion.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think everyone knows what my positioning was when the conversation began about Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. I did say never, and I'll say the same thing about this, potential quote unquote Khabib versus Mayweather boxing bout. I don't, but again, end quote. I don't think it's going to happen. I really don't. Now, is Khabib, an A draw, the A side? He gets big numbers. I know that
he will get bigger now too, because he is a household name. But he was a household name built by Conor McGregor, essentially, by beating Conor McGregor and drop kicking Dylan Dennis.
Yeah, and Daniel Cormier comes out and says he wouldn't last long. I mean, he would not last long. Conor McGregor is a better boxer than Khabib Nurmagomedov, despite that wondrous, beautiful right hand that Khabib landed. Conor, I'm pretty sure realized, you know what, I made a mistake. I made a big mistake in training for this fight. It's evidenced by the post that he made. But Khabib and Floyd Mayweather, it's the same thing. Floyd Mayweather would have Khabib last as long as Floyd Mayweather wanted him to. Again, if that was an MMA fight, Floyd Mayweather wouldn't last very long. But it is what it is, and I don't see the fight happening, guys.
Michael Bisping, as much as I love his commentary on fight situations, had the balls, Joe, to say that Khabib would go the distance with Mayweather. This is asinine.
It is, to the point that now you are questioning me about getting an opinion on it. So Michael Bisping probably did the right thing there to throw something that outrageous out there. And you know what? Hypothetically speaking, can that fight go the distance? Of course it can. If Floyd Mayweather wants to go the distance and give people a 1-hour show or a 57-minute show, whatever it would be, he could do it. I mean, there's just a different level of what Floyd Mayweather does when it comes to boxing than what any mixed martial artist can do in the striking realm. So yeah, I mean, Michael's just being Michael, to be honest with you. But yeah, it is what it is, guys. I cannot see it happening, to be honest with you.
James, what do you think about that? Can I think Mike go the distance?
I mean, I think Michael Bisping's saying what he can to get his name out there. I mean, these commentators know what they're doing when they make comments like that. There's going to be 50,000 articles written on it from all the MMA sites, and it's just they need their clickbait, and that's that. Do I think he really believes that? I don't think so, but I mean, again, Floyd is one of these guys where when it comes to his fight style, he likes to go a little bit later. He's not a guy that finishes fights early. So the fact that, you know, it went as long as it did with McGregor and Floyd, to me, wasn't surprising when it happened. And now in this case, if they ever did fight hypothetically, I think it would, you know, go a couple rounds. I mean, it's not going to be something where it's going to be the full 12 rounds, but Mayweather is known for sort of keeping his fights going on a little bit longer.
Dana White spoke to Brett Okamoto of ESPN, and Dana White was asked, well, who's next for Khabib Nurmagomedov? Now, there is a lot to really digest about this Khabib Nurmagomedov situation. Before then, I think there are some hearings coming up very soon. But Dana White was quick to say, Tony Ferguson, that's got to be the guy. That's got to be the fight. Right now, they are on a 4-year streak of having fights pulled. Every year since 2015, that happens. James, does Tony Ferguson get this fight next? And does the streak continue? Does it reach Undertaker levels at WrestleMania?
Yeah, I think it finally happens. And I think all they have to do is just bubble wrap Tony Ferguson and Khabib, to put them in some sort of, remember the Bubble Boy episode on Seinfeld? They need to do something like that where they just keep them in solitary confinement as long as possible. But this has to happen now. Ferguson has done more than enough. He had his title taken away. To me, he's the rightful #1 contender to fight for the title at this point. And again, it doesn't, I know McGregor put some stuff out there yesterday, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later about, you know, him, responding to the loss, but I just don't see that rematch happening right away. Like I mentioned last week, I think that if the UFC's smart, they give McGregor another fight in between, so he's not totally going to devalue his stock, because I don't think the rematch would go in his favor. And with Ferguson, I mean, I think he couldn't have done any better as far as his performance at UFC 229, and there isn't anyone else in line other than maybe Dustin Poirier, but you know, at this point, he's injured, and that's just not an option. So to me, Ferguson, Khabib, finally going to happen. I think so.
I liked it that Dana White was pretty transparent about the messiness of that lightweight title situation, Joe. He said 3 guys had a claim to that title. McGregor lost his. Now you have 2 guys. Let's make it 1. It's the right move to make. And it's not going to be a big giant fight. It's not going to sell 1 million pay-per-views. It might do about 500, 600,000 though. And in the UFC's landscape, if you have a guy that's not named Conor McGregor, not named John Jones, not named Daniel Cormier even, Brock Lesnar, GSP, and you're selling 500,000 pay-per-views, that's a pretty damn good day, Joe.
Yeah, that's a fair number. That's a good analogy there. I think that's pretty much what that pay-per-view would do, maybe slightly over 500. Remember, guys, Dana White's job is to be a spin doctor. He's going to spin whatever he wants so it comes out the way he likes it to come out there. Before this, Tony Ferguson had no shot whatsoever at getting a title shot. He got stripped. Blah, 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 blah. The guy was the interim champ, this, and that. They were, doing things they shouldn't have done with Tony. But now that Khabib defeats Conor McGregor, he needs a new opponent. Tony has a fantastic fight versus Anthony Pettis. All of a sudden, the DJ starts spinning records, and next thing you know, yep, Tony Ferguson should be next for Khabib Nurmagomedov, despite the fact that that is the right fight. The only issue I have with that is, the MMA gods refuse to let us have that fight. James is saying it's finally going to happen. And the first thing that I think about is, I wish it would happen. But for some strange reason, guys, every time these two are destined to meet, another type of destiny steps in the way and they don't end up fighting.
Hopefully this comes to be, from a stylistic standpoint, I think Tony Ferguson probably gets beaten. But You never know. I mean, we've seen some holes in Khabib's game, but then again, that's what I've said ahead of each of Khabib's fights, that he inevitably wins. So I think this is the fight to make. It is a high-level fight. It is a fight that, quite frankly, has 3 years of build behind it, but no real resolution, and hopefully we find out that resolution soon. We're not going to get any resolution to Luke Rockhold versus Chris Weidman. Rockhold pulled from this fight. I posted a tweet earlier this year when it was announced that Rockhold was going to fight Gustafsson, and I said, I can't wait until 2022 when they're both healthy and we can see this fight. Neither have fought since then. I'm not convinced that Gustafsson actually shows up to fight John Jones on the night that they are scheduled to fight. Luke Rockhold pulled from his fight with Chris Weidman. James, you spoke to Weidman right before this. This is gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, we really wanted to see this rematch, just to get some closure in terms of, there was rumblings about Weidman being injured heading into the first fight with Rockhold. He's coming off the knockout loss. I mean, both of these guys, it was an important fight for both of them. But I got to be honest, Jacare as a replacement isn't so bad, in my opinion. I'm glad the UFC was able to make it work, but you got to feel for David Branch here. 2 times he's had opponents pulled in Yoel Romero and now Jacare. I got to feel for that guy. Hopefully the UFC compensates him there. But as far as the new matchup, it's as good as it's going to get. It's too bad for Rockhold. His stock has really plummeted since basically he won the title. It's pretty much been downhill since then. So hopefully he has a speedy recovery. And I think this might be the end of Luke Rockhold at middleweight, because I don't know what matchup he would want to take at 185 pounds. He might be better off fighting at 205. And
you actually spoke to Chris Weidman about the rumor that Luke Rockhold tried to get this fight to happen at 205. Weidman completely denied that.
Yeah, he did. So Rockhold, I was at the media scrum at 229. Rockhold was a guest, backstage, and he said that he asked Weidman for a fight at light heavyweight, and Weidman declined. And Weidman, when I spoke to him last week, said he had never heard of that. Now, look, I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle here, but I think the reality is for Weidman, that wouldn't have made much sense because of the fact that if he gets a win at 85, he's probably getting the next title shot. He has that win over Calvin Gastelum, who got the title shot against Whitaker. If Weidman moves up to 205, I don't know if that holds as much weight as him fighting at middleweight. And for Rockhold, I mean, he's already beat Weidman. For him, put 2-0 on the stamp, and for him, it also means that he could, raise his stock even more. He needed to get a win, and now that's not even going to happen here. So it's unfortunate for Rockhold, but that would have been interesting to see both these guys fight at 205.
So this is really a domino effect that just sends them toppling over. Joe, what your thoughts? Luke Rockhold, is he done at 185? His buddy Daniel Cormier essentially moving up to heavyweight and retiring, maybe. Although Daniel Cormier says there's a chance he won't get stripped of the title if he loses against Derek Lewis. So a lot to unpack there. Rockhold's future, what do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not changing my positioning from a week or two ago when I said this would have been his last fight at 185 pounds. I think with Daniel moving up and being the heavyweight champion, it opens up the 205 division for the gym. And Luke Rockhold has wanted to go up there for quite some time. Now it's the opportunity. Luke's a funny guy as is. He operates on a different frequency like so many other mixed martial artists. And, this could be whether he's injured or not, I don't know, but this could be a blessing in disguise for him. I don't think he likes cutting to 185 pounds because his, teammate was in the 205-pound division. So I think this opens up the opportunity for him for his next fight. And he, either Chris or Luke are good infusions to the 205-pound division. The only difference is, like you said, if Chris should defeat Jacare, I think he will beat Jacare because Jacare is not the same fighter unless something crazy happens, but he's not the same fighter as he was before. Chris puts himself for that title shot. And I think James is bang on with Chris Weidman's stock. This guy was at an all-time high during that Anderson Silva and then the title defense era and then plummeted, to say the least. It's amazing when you're not in the public view how quickly people forget the accolades that you've accumulated. And this is a guy where, he's also rubbed people the wrong way behind the scenes, believe it or not. He is that guy. But, I guess it's the arrogance that some people bring on and off camera. So we'll see what happens in this fight here. He's going to have a tough fight with Jacare. I still think Jacare is the same guy. And then we'll see what Chris wants to do because he's not getting any younger, and that 205-pound division could be something for him as well.
So Weidman now faces Jacare Souza, as you mentioned, James, a suitable replacement. Jacare was set to fight David Branch. This is a fight we haven't had before as well, and it is a high-level middleweight fight. Joe, how do you think this goes? I'm actually very, very excited for this fight.
I think Jacare fatigues midway through that second round. If he can land, one of those, odd throwing bombs that he throws, Chris can be in big trouble. I just think Chris's striking is more on point. And it depends on what Chris wants to do. I think he should probably keep this fight standing. Obviously, with Jacare's submission acumen, but at the same time, once he gets tired, Jacare, then you could probably entertain taking him down and then punishing him, keeping your limbs in check, because Chris does have a fantastic submission game as well, which means his defense is there as well. So I think Chris will dictate where this fight's going to go, provided Jacare doesn't land that bomb early in that first round.
James, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would probably favor Weidman in that fight, just because I do think his knockout power is still there. With Jacare, we have seen some glimpses of that. The Derek Brunson fight comes to mind. But what's funny is you think Jacare is a lot older in this fight. He's only 4 years older than Weidman. Weidman's 34, and Jacare obviously is 38. So this is one of those fights where we'll see who has more left in the division. Weidman's had a lot of injuries. He's been inactive. He hasn't fought in more than a year. He does have that win over Calvin Gastelum, so I think that shows that, that he's still a top fighter in the division. But we'll find out. But if I had to pick, I'd go with Weidman at this point.
I wouldn't doubt that Jacare can almost go like Damian Maia. I've often compared him to a knuckleballer in baseball. How Damian Maia doesn't have a lot else besides his grappling, but he's going to be able to make it a long time based on that if he can avoid getting hit. Souza would have to switch up his fighting style quite a bit, because he is often far too excited to stand and strike. Don't know if that's a great idea with Weidman, but I don't doubt that Souza could knock him out. This fight moved Souza up from a bout with David Branch. Fortunately for the UFC, David Branch is a versatile guy, has taken a fight with Jared Cannonier, who has been a fringe 205er for the last couple of years. For a late replacement fight, James, I think this is suitable. It's okay. This show has had depth issues, which we're going to continue to talk about. You've had a change in main events. You've had issues with the co-main event. Now that's gone. You had issues with the middleweight fight. Then the middleweight fight below that. So this card, based on what it was a month ago or even 3 or 4 weeks ago, looks nothing like what it does now. It's completely different on the pay-per-view end, James.
It is. And like we talked about last week, they're doing, if they would cut back the pay-per-views, if they cut back the shows, you'd have more options to fill up cards in situations like this. It's a decent card. It's not the type of card that I think, we're used to seeing in New York as far as some of the matchups. It's still got Israel Adesanya on this card, which I think in itself is a seller for sure. But it's just, it happens. Sometimes fights don't materialize. They had all the issues with the main event. Then Poirier gets injured. There's lots of weird stuff that's happened with this card, but nonetheless, I think they've done the best they could with what they had to work with, I guess.
Joe, you also have a Sajara Eubanks and Roxanne Modafferi that got added late. That's a solid fight, at least as far as rankings go. Ben Saunders against a former Bellator champion and Lyman Good. That's a good prelim fight, I think. But still, this show is, you got Carl Roberson and Jack Marshman. No disrespect to them. That's not a pay-per-view fight.
No, it's not. But I like Jack. Both guys can
I like both of them.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. That Israel Adesanya fight is going to be fun with Derek Brunson. That's for sure.
Yes.
If you go up and down this card, there may not be that name value, right? I'm just looking at some of the odds right now, but there's going to be some fun fights like Lando Venata, Matt Frivola. That's going to be a bang fest. That's going to be good. Jason Knight, who's basically the highlight of the night all the time. Well, not as of late, but he's game for anything, and he's a big favorite in this fight. My boy Kurt Holloway from the Titan days. Titan, by the way. Yeah, right. I think it's a fun fight. I think it's a fun card.
I think it's an ethical conflict, Joe.
What's that?
That's an ethical conflict. I'm going to need you to stop your shilling.
But yeah, I'm going to enjoy this card, man. It's going to be fun. It's just it doesn't have that crazy name value, and I think James is right, or you were right as well. Where so many things changed. It should have been other people headlining this event, other title fights, other this, other that. But the UFC can only do with what they have, with what's available at that time to make these types of changes. So it's still going to be a fun fight. Is it going to draw massive pay-per-view numbers? No. But yeah, we're tuning in. We're going to have some fun with this. And Derek Lewis's post-fight interview, win or lose, is going to be fantastic. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed it will be. So we talked about the depth of this show being sacrificed, and one of the topics that we had tackled in previous weeks, why don't they make Poirier and Diaz the main event? Why don't they do it at this weight? Why don't they do it without a title? If Dustin Poirier is to be believed, UFC exhausted many of those options, except the 165-pound option, the one that they realistically should have. But Dustin Poirier says they offered the fight as a main event, but Nate Diaz kept renegotiating. Joe, this does not come as a surprise to me at all.
Nope.
I didn't believe that Nate Diaz was going to fight until I saw him in that cage. It didn't happen. He is notoriously difficult to deal with. He said at a press conference, I had a lawsuit for 2 years. That's why I didn't fight. I don't know why they didn't tell you. I don't know why you didn't tell us. Why didn't you tell us? They offered him fights for years, and he didn't take them. He is a part... Nate Diaz is a part of the reason we launched a new YouTube. He's back. UFC got a ton of guys back. And what UFC was trying to do was the smart thing. They're like, okay, this guy's coming back. We're not going to put him against a guy who's already established as a household name. We're going to put him against a guy who could be a household name. And they tried their damnedest to make this work outside of the 165-pound thing. You know, I got to side with Dustin Poirier in the UFC on this one, Joe. Nate Diaz seems really difficult to deal with still.
Yeah, it's it's Nate and it's his management. They will look for any opportunity to quickly renegotiate anything, and management will stand by their client. If there's an opportunity to get more money out of a certain situation because of a placement on a card, they're going to fight for it. And if they don't win, our client's not going to fight. Very simple, right? So it'll always turn into a situation. And again, should Nate have made that public? Yeah, potentially. But those guys don't operate like you and I do, or James does, right? They'll hide. And even when they do agree to things, how many times have we heard and seen that the Diaz brothers have agreed to a fight or a new contract, and immediately the very first interview, they're talking about being underpaid that's just how they are, man. It's how they are. So nothing surprises me about them. And I'm always going to be their biggest fan because I just love seeing them compete. I love the build up to their fights. I love the fact that no matter what they do, we're going to talk about it on Tuesdays because they are who they are. But it would be nice to see them both inside the octagon again. And we've heard about Nick coming back, not coming back, coming back, not coming back. Same thing with Nate. And, Sean Ross Sapp is going to always say the same thing. I'll believe it when I see it.
Now Nick is saying he could beat Canelo Alvarez in a boxing match. And I'm like, man, you got to stop getting high before you do interviews.
Oh, he believes it.
Yeah, I know he believes it. But the thing is, he can't. I don't care about the size advantage. Canelo Alvarez would piece him up with ease. James, your thoughts on the Nate Diaz, Dustin Poirier situation? This was a big one that UFC lost.
There's nothing they could really do. I think Diaz, again, he's being selective. We've talked about this, at length with the fact that because he's beat McGregor, he feels like he has all this leveraging power. And this doesn't surprise me in terms of the demands, in terms of, and I'm on Poirier's side here. I mean, here's a guy who, realistically could have earned himself a title shot with that win over Alvarez, but opted to take the Diaz fight as a way to boost up the New York card. And, here he is having to deal with all these things with Diaz. He's just him and his brother. I mean, we've seen this over the years. They've been difficult to work with. And, I think that I think in some ways they overvalue themselves. And this is the result that we get, which is Diaz is going to be selective. Dana's quote, I believe, was, I'm not, unless Diaz is dying to get back in there, I'm not going to give him a call. And I don't blame him because it's probably a big headache to try and deal with this guy who we don't even know is a proven draw per se, when it comes to other cards. We've just seen him against McGregor lately anyways. So to me, why bother? I mean, if it's going to be this much of a hassle, move on to the next superstar, to me, in my opinion. So I think I completely understand the UFC and Dustin Poirier's frustrations on this whole issue. Apparently
Poirier's injury is minor. If they can get that on the end of the year card, sure. But if not, I'm so just tired of I'm tired of talking about the UFC dealing with Nate Diaz, much less them. Also, I want to point out something that happened just now on Eddie Alvarez's Twitter as we went on the air. It says, if Team Khabib leaves UFC because Zybara gets kicked out and then Artem strikes, then there's no way I'm staying as well. Well, Ali Abdulaziz needs to do a better job of scheduling his clients' tweets, because Eddie Alvarez signed with ONE FC last week.
Yeah, Eddie's not an Ali client, though. I should point that out.
He's not.
No, he's not.
Wow.
Yeah, he's not.
He got a hold. He hacked. He's a hacker.
No, I think, but I should point this out. Mark Henry obviously has a great relationship with Ali, calls him the best manager ever and all these things. So I wonder if Mark, was like, hey, Eddie, would you do this one? Would you do us a solid one? Or Eddie's trolling. I don't know. It's one of the two.
It's awkward. It's awkward. Also this week, Conor McGregor didn't exactly go into hiding after his UFC 229 loss. He's been out doing things here and there. I've got a news update on this on the new YouTube. Go subscribe, guys. But he broke down his UFC 229 loss, and I thought was a bit delusional in doing so, Joe. I didn't think that he gave Khabib the credit that he deserved in some of this. I mean, he kind of did, but considering how humble he had been in defeat before, I honestly expected something different. His assessment of wrestling, I think, is a little off base and probably one of the reasons why he ended up losing this fight.
Yeah, I don't often give Conor McGregor any credit for a lot of his tweets and a lot of his Instagram posts in general, or Facebook. But this one I will give him credit for. Is it exactly how you and I and James and whomever saw the fight? A little bit different, but I think he was humble enough to say, here's what I think, here's what I saw, and it gives us another glimpse into the guy that was humbled, right? He breaks down the fight round by round by round by round, and also gives us an insight in terms of, do you realize this is a sport? It's not a fight, it's a sport. So if it was a fight, we could break down a different thing. If you were outside, or if Khabib came out off of that bus and you guys got into a fight, we could break that down. But this is a sport that has rounds, it has weight classes, and it has rules, and you're allowed to do certain things. So there's some of the stuff that Conor said where I was kind of like, well, dude, he's going to wrestle you when he wants to wrestle you. And if you publicly stated that, you didn't respect his striking and didn't really get the rounds in, that's not anyone's fault but your own, not your team. But then he did come out and say specifically, I'm going to start, I don't know what the actual term was, but he basically said you should be in charge of your own career, make your own decisions. And he admitted that's where he screwed up. So I don't know if that's a backward compliment or shot to his coaches and his teammates, but at the same time, this is MMA. It goes back to like when Rampage Jackson complains that they keep putting me against wrestlers. Dude, it's MMA.
Yeah.
Guy wants to wrestle you because he doesn't want to eat your leather sandwiches all the time. He's going to wrestle you.
Also, I think Rampage Jackson at this point can say, no, I'm not taking that fight. Give me somebody else. And at this stage of his career, it won't really affect his growth. James, what do you think about this? As Stone Osborne points out in the chat, Conor, I won the fight but lost to Sport McGregor.
Yeah, that whole thing was a bit confusing in terms of just reading through the entire thing. And it sounds too like I think he's finally coming to the realization that the rematch is not going to happen right away. I mean, I think it's good on him for owning up to the loss and sort of addressing everything and just kind of assessing his performance. I guess this is what we want to hear from fighters. That's why we follow them on social media. We want to hear how they're feeling, and I think it's good to do this as opposed to running away from a loss, which Conor's never done that, but we've seen other athletes, Ronda Rousey, do that. So it's good to see some honesty there, but I think there were parts of this that came off kind of bad. I mean, there's nowhere where he says that I need to take time to go work on things. He's just basically looking at it from his point of view, but I don't think he's taking some responsibility for some of the stuff that happened in the fight in terms of some of the things he did wrong. So I like his honesty, but I think it could have been a little bit better in terms of what he posted there.
Back in the day, we used to hear Tank Abbott say, yeah, he may have won the fight, but I went to the bar and he went to the hospital. Conor can't say that. Conor can't say that. The best he can say is, I went to the bar and he was detained. That's really the extent of how we can go there. But Conor McGregor also spoke out and said that he would be interested in fighting Anderson Silva, who has competed effectively at 205 pounds in the past. Conor McGregor, maybe at his best, was when he was at 145, but he is a 155er now. They are 30 pounds apart. James, is this a possibility at 179 pounds, I think that Silva's coaches were saying?
This one's iffy because, I mean, obviously Silva is nowhere near the same fighter he used to be, and these are two huge names if you were to put them together in a fight. But again, I think the UFC's got to be careful here with who they match up McGregor with after this. There's a chance he could lose a fight against Anderson Silva. He's a much bigger guy. Anderson Silva's never fought at featherweight before. Conor McGregor has. I mean, that's a huge difference, right? So I think we have to sort of look at these things. And, if I'm Conor's management, if I'm Paradigm, I'm really thinking about what the next move is here, because you do not want 2 losses in a row. That kills your stock. As popular as McGregor is, as popular as someone as Chael Sonnen is, who's lost a bunch of fights and still been able to spin it around, it still loses some luster. And McGregor's gone far beyond just the MMA bubble. He's really resonated with casual fans too. So will it happen? Maybe, but I don't know if it happens now. I think McGregor fights someone that he's going to beat, and then we sort of talk about these other fights.
So by the time Silva fights again, he'll likely be 2 years removed from his Brunson win, and that's of no fault of his own. That's USADA's fault. And we've played devil's advocate on this podcast before about looking at the wins and losses of Silva. The first Weidman loss, he was clowning around right as he was feeling himself out. He was getting beat before the leg injury, but the leg injury still happened. You never know what can happen in an Anderson Silva fight. The Bisping fight, you could argue that Silva should have won for any number of reasons. And the Daniel Cormier fight was a fight that he took up a weight class against the champion, a few weeks after surgery, I believe. So, I mean, definitely some weird circumstances surrounding Anderson Silva. It doesn't seem like it's been almost 2 years since we've seen him fight, Joe. And he doesn't seem like he's slowing down anytime soon. And keep in mind, Ed Soares used to throw out Anderson's retiring at 35 horse shit that he threw out. He's 43. He's probably going to be 44 and still fighting. What do you think about this?
I think listen, can this fight happen? Absolutely it can happen, because this would be a big selling pay-per-view. No title on the line, just a super fight. And I know for a fact that this would sell big numbers, not just because of Conor McGregor's cachet, but that the older fans that haven't really tuned into much UFC recently, they know that Anderson Silva name. Many of them still believe that he's one of the best of all time, notwithstanding some of the fights that he's had recently. And all of a sudden he's going after this young kid and blah, blah, blah. People would tune in to watch this. And if Dana White even gets the smallest sniff that this could be a moneymaker, they will figure out a way to put this down together. Do I think Anderson beats Conor McGregor at 179 pounds? Probably not. I think Conor McGregor's speed will some way, somehow be the difference in this fight, not by much. But, if Anderson Silva can connect, that's the hardest punch Conor McGregor's ever going to face. That's a game changer there. But the bottom line is, I would love to see this fight. This fight intrigues me, on the weird levels in my brain. You know what I'm saying? I would like to see this fight go down for sure.
It would be one of those. You can't call it a super fight. Maybe kind of a fantasy fight, because it is pure fantasy at this point. Bellator cracked 500,000 viewers. I think they did 521,000 on Paramount for Bellator 208 with Chael Sonnen and Fedor. There were viewership options on DAZN. James, what do you think about these numbers? I mean, it's the best they've done since May, but with Fedor and Sonnen, you'd expect a little bit more.
Yeah, I did too. The numbers should have been higher. I mean, just with what they had on paper. But again, I think you're asking a lot of the combat sports fans these days as far as how they're going to pay for watching fights. I mean, you have DAZN, you have ESPN Plus, you have UFC Fight Pass. I mean, it's expensive to be a combat sports fan. We all know this. So I think that plays a part in it. I think it's also just the fact that of timing. I mean, I know, again, like when it comes to booking these casinos or booking these venues for doing events, it's you have to sort of do it well in advance. But I don't like the Bellator cards back to back. I don't like the Friday, Saturday cards. Yeah. Why not stack one of the cards, move the other card to a couple months later? Or better yet, I mean, last weekend we had nothing going on other than PFL, like you mentioned off the top. Why isn't Bellator doing a show then? Take away some of the, because fans will tune in if there's nothing on. But if you have, back to back, it's tough, especially if you got a family and you got other things going on. It's very difficult to do that. So, I would have expected more, but at the same time, looking at the fact that they had two cards, I think that sort of takes away some of it.
Joe?
What James said.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I still don't understand the original logic of doing these back-to-back shows when the following week there was nothing going on. You have the opportunity to take advantage and get all, or if not as many, of the eyeballs out there from the MMA world to tune into your product. Back to back is just, to me, it was weird from day one. On the flip side of that, the 500K number that they got, I think that was in line from what I was thinking in terms of previous cards that they had and ratings that they did have. Because I'll be honest with you, there was nobody outside of the MMA bubble in my circle that were talking Fedor versus Sonnen. Nobody. I didn't have anyone saying, hey, man, is Fedor fighting? Is Sonnen fighting Fedor? Nobody, other than people that watch MMA or tune into this podcast or, message me here and there because they are fight fans. They knew what was going on. It wasn't like something where, James, we could walk into a
Sobeys. We'll use a Canadian reference.
Yeah, a Boston Pizza, Sobeys, whatever, to say, oh, the signs are up there. Let's watch this fight. There was no real traction, in my opinion, unlike the Khabib, Conor fight. So I think Bellator, initially made an error in doing so, but the numbers are pretty good, but could have been better.
Chael Sonnen, after getting beaten by Fedor, said that Fedor is the greatest heavyweight of all time and that Cain Velasquez has effectively removed himself from that conversation due to his inactivity. I am inclined to agree, Joe. We talk about it all the time. The Cain Velasquez thing has become almost a running joke on this show. And the first week that Fightful existed, we previewed a Cain Velasquez fight and reviewed one. That's the last time he fought. That was in July of 2016, Joe.
Yeah. You cannot have Cain Velasquez in the greatest of all time conversation. I do agree with that, only because he just simply hasn't competed because of injuries so often and so frequently. He was, Fedor even said it. He was a huge fan of Cain Velasquez, right?
And since 2011, he's beaten 3 guys.
Yeah.
3 guys.
Yeah, he's going to go down as a few other fighters that come top of mind for myself as, the coulda, shoulda, woulda beens, right? This is a guy that was on cloud 9 after becoming the world champion. Those fights with Dos Santos, the Brock Lesnar victory. He was the man. He was the man with a trajectory that was, way past the clouds, past the moon, into a different universe. And unfortunately, due to injuries, it's never going to happen. I don't think it can. This guy would have to come back and fight every 3 months and go on an absolute tear. And how's he going to win the title if his partner is a champ, right? So, even the fact that Daniel Cormier went up there says a lot about where Cain is right now, because those 2 guys don't want to fight. So,
yeah, I'm in complete agreement with this. Cain's got to fight if he wants to be in that conversation. Now he's 36 years old. He had shown up at the WWE Performance Center maybe to do a little bit of a tryout, a feeling out process there. And I'm thinking, man, if you can't stay in the cage, I think it'd be kind of hard for you to keep up that schedule. And he's not the type of crossover star that the WWE would put all their eggs in his basket. He's way more known than Matt Riddle, but he's also not willing to put in the schedule that a Matt Riddle did, or at least I would think not, on the independent circuit. So there we go. John Anik re-ups with the UFC. Joe, your thoughts?
Attaboy. Good for him. Good guy, good peeps. A guy that I've kept in contact with, every so often. And he's a stand-up guy, as nice as you can possibly be. That public image is exactly who he is behind the scenes. Just a great guy, well-deserved. And I knew when he first signed, he was going to get a lot of flack because it was Mike Goldberg at the time. And, he was coming in there, and eventually he was going to be the next guy. But he took a lot of heat, a lot of flack, still does to this day. I get flack when I do my pay-per-views or my shows, so it is what it is. But I don't think he ever deserved it. And I always knew him to be an exceptional professional and an exceptional broadcaster, does his job as a play-by-play broadcaster near perfect when it comes to reading your promos, when to do it, when to stop, when you've got 2 people in the booth, 3 people in the booth, his interviews. I just think he's fantastic.
Also, Daniel Cormier has stated that he is in the running to be a WWE commentator. Fox is pushing for him to be a WWE color commentator. They want a more sport-based show. James, what do you think of this news, as well as the Anik re-up news? Because that it doesn't really cause a shift in the UFC. They have Dominic Cruz. They have a few people just around in case Daniel Cormier leaves. But I think Cormier's fit in really well with the UFC thus far.
Yeah, I think that Cormier is just aligning himself for retirement. He's got commentating duties with Fox. He could, make some more money doing some wrestling as well. So good for him. And Sean, you actually, didn't say John Anik's name right. You meant to say MMA industry podcast guest John Anik on Fightful.com. That was on there. But no, John's great at what he does, and I echo what Joe says too. Outside of the cage, just a really nice guy and someone who is really, fine-tuned his craft. I mean, he's gotten exceptionally better than when he first started. I think he's the standard at this point. And it's tough to fill those shoes. It's tough to have a sport where you have these fans who are so passionate about everything and, just keep trucking and really be the best at what you do. And it's great to see the UFC making an investment in the broadcast booth in Anik, who I think is just unbelievable. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for him.
PFL had essentially 26 fights last week, not many of which made any buzz. James, did anything stand out to you besides Ray Cooper beating up Jake Shields like 400 times this year?
Nothing like really. Yeah, that's true. I mean, good for Ray Cooper. Here's a guy who, didn't even have a great record, heading into the PFL season. And now he's beat Jake Shields not once, but twice. And Jake Shields is no slouch. I think Shields is one of the most underrated welterweights, maybe of all time. In terms of his resume and what he's been able to do. But Lewis Taylor, another guy I'm very impressed with, training partner of Bilal Muhammad back in Illinois. They sort of came up together. I know Bilal's in Milwaukee now, but Lewis has been sort of a mentor and a training partner with him. Kind of weird the way that fight ended with John Howard, but, at the same time, I'm happy to see Lewis get a chance at $1 million. He is, how old? 39 years old, I think? Yeah. So good for him having a shot at that. And as far as some other highlights, Rick Story losing. I ended up getting that broken arm. Bojan Velikovic losing, a couple of UFC vets not really getting it done. The tournament format, I still think, there needs to be some work there. Some of the rules, like I know if a fight goes to a draw, the person who won the first round advances. I also don't like the fact that they fight twice in one night on these playoff cards. I think that's something they could space out a little bit more, maybe start the season a little bit earlier. But yeah, I mean, it's something I'm paying attention to, but I haven't tuned in for a lot of it, to be honest, because they're always at really weird times. And I don't even think in Canada, there's nowhere you can watch it on TV. I think Facebook you can watch it, but that's not ideal. I mean, it would be good if they could figure out something broadcast-wise in Canada. Terrible
promotion as well, but you could also say the same for this weekend show. Is it Moncton? Am I saying that correctly? Moncton.
Just like money, Moncton.
All right. Well, we have full coverage of that this weekend. James has pros picks up for that show. Also has interviews with a lot of the fighters on this card, which we will talk about. Stevie Ray is on the show kicking things off. Not the one I did making a finisher with recently, although I think he could be a suitable Harlem Heat replacement. You did speak to Ariane Bowler, though, James, who was supposed to be walked to the cage last year by then WWE champion Jinder Mahal. He told you that they don't really keep in touch as much anymore. And actually, he trained with Bobby Lashley recently.
Yeah, some obviously some cool wrestling crossover, which is always good here on Fightful to hear stuff like that. But yeah, and we should mention too, Arjun, someone who helped Daniel Cormier for the Stipe Miocic fight. So Arjun looking to bounce back here, facing a really tough guy in Marcelo Golm. I actually, this isn't an easy fight for him to come back, and face, because he's coming off his first career loss. But we'll see. Can he make adjustments? People just assume because Bowler is, has a good record and he's just coming in the UFC that he's a young guy. He's not. He's in his 30s. So he's really got the window here is short for him if he wants to make a run. Good fight for him. He's the favorite right now, but I think he's got a tall task coming up here on Saturday against Marcelo Golm.
We have Sarah Moras against Talita Bernardo. Any women's fight, you never know what can launch somebody. Joe, how do you think this one goes?
Yeah, it is one of those fights where I'm kind of like scratching my head, but Sarah is a -200 favorite. I think that's right, or it could have been slightly lower. But Sarah, I think Sarah's just can bring this fight to where she needs it to be. Don't know if she can get a finish. Wouldn't be surprised if she does, but I think she wins this fight.
James, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so as well. And the one thing we got to talk about, which you'll see in our interview with Sarah up on Fightful, is that she moved. She's no longer training at Toshido. Talked a little bit about why things weren't working out for her there. Now she's in Las Vegas training at Extreme Couture, getting a lot of different looks, a lot of female bodies. I mean, that's one thing she didn't have at Toshido, was a lot of other WMMA fighters that were professional, that were at a high level. So she's getting that now, getting to use the PI. She's so much happier just from, you can even just tell in her voice when she's talking about, living in Vegas now. So I think that's going to pay dividends. And, she has the win over Ashley Evans Smith recently. I know her last fight didn't go her way. I think she's really going to, make a statement in this fight and get a good win here. And an opponent in Tatalita Bernardo that she should beat. Like Joe said, I think the line's right where it needs to be, but I'm picking Sarah Morris in this fight.
Under the radar fight, Calvin Kattar, Chris Fishgold. I like this fight. It is very, very under the radar. Calvin Kattar looking to bounce back. You think you can get it done, James?
Yeah, I do. Chris Fishgold, in my opinion, I think he's a good prospect. He's a Cage Warriors guy. Long layoff, though. Hasn't fought since October of last year. He's actually going to be moving down to 45 for this fight. Cater's fought there before. Cater's a good fighter, man. He just lost to Moicano. Before that, he finished Shane Burgos. He got that win over Andre Fili in his debut. He's a really solid fighter, and I think he's going to go out there and put on a good performance here in a fight that he really should win. A lot of guys lose to Moicano. I think he, took from that, what he could, made some adjustments, and he's going to come back even better here. And I like him in this fight against Fishgold. The line on this, I feel like it was high, and I remember thinking, I don't know if it should be that good. I'm going to just check it right now.
There's two lines that are crazy, James.
Yeah.
The Hack-Harass fight is one of them, and you actually spoke to him recently.
Yes, this Calvin Kattar fight, this catered Kattar fight, one bookie has it at -275. Yeah. Another has it at -455.
Yeah, William Hill does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I'm seeing that here.
What?
Yeah, I wouldn't bet that much money on Cater at all, but -275 is probably where it needs to be, even a little high in my opinion. Fishgold, like I said, he's a Cage Warriors champion, but moving down to 45 in your debut, that's a tall task. And Cater's, he's looked really good in the octagon. I have to go with Cater in this one.
There are some crazy flyers on this show. From even Artem Lobov, who I think is going to lose, to Patrick Cummins and Serkinov. I mean, good God, Serkinov's a -500. And you have Hack-Harass, who you had spoke to recently, James. Yeah. He's like a -850.
Yeah, he was -1,000 on Monday when I looked at the line here. So he's obviously some money's come in on
he's -1,000 at Bet365, James.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. Yeah, I'm just looking at 5 times here. It's just there's no way I'd bet that much money. Look, Hack-Harass looked amazing in his last fight against Diakaze. This was sort of his coming out party. If you remember his UFC debut against Marcin Held was on short notice. He lost that fight. You know what? That was a short notice fight. Didn't really get to see his true skill set, and we saw that in his last fight. So I think people are kind of like, this guy's the real deal. And Goody, I mean, he's had an up and down career. He's lost to Laprise and Olivier Aubin-Mercier. A lot of tries
in the UFC, real rough go in the UFC. I think
so I see what they're doing here, but Hack-Harass should win this fight, but there's no way I'd bet that much. I mean, he's still relatively young, 23 years old, I think. So to me that's too much stock in someone like that. So he should win, but no way I'd bet him at that price.
Yeah, that is pretty wild. You also have Nordine Taleb against Sean Strickland. This fight is basically a pick'em. I'm going Sean Strickland on this one. Joe, what do you think?
I'm not going against the Canadian.
Ah, shit.
Nordine Taleb's going to win this fight, but I do want to get your thoughts, Sean. With Serkinov being at -500 on one side, there's a +375 for Cummins.
Got 5 on it.
Yeah.
For
James,
sure.
I got 5 on that. Come on.
I got 5 on anybody who's got a line of +575 in a UFC fight as well.
I don't go against Canadians, Misha, but
I mean, you even look at the Edwards and Madge fight, and it's like -500 at Bovada. I think it's insane. Like some of these lines, and they're one of these lines is going to be an upset. One of them is going to be an upset. Especially, I was surprised about the Cummins Serkinov one, which we will talk about in a bit. Vellante versus Ed Herman, James, that is such a UFC Fox Sports 1 fight.
Yeah. And could be an upset too. I mean, Herman's been inactive. He hasn't looked great in his last couple of fights, but I mean, Vellante's had fights that it's just been disappointing. I mean, the Shogun fight's a good example where that's a fight he should have won. He didn't win it. I know it's in Brazil. I know it's tough, but that's a fight he should win. Herman's a guy, has been known to surprise. +210. Why not throw a little flyer on that? But you mentioned the Taleb fight. I mean, I'm picking Strickland in this one as well. But if you look at right now, Taleb wins by KO or TKO +625. Just ask Danny Roberts or Eric Silva about Nordine Taleb and his knockout power, because he knocked out both of those guys. It could happen in this fight. Strickland coming off a knockout loss in his last bout, so anything can happen. There's a lot of interesting prop bets on this card if you guys have a chance to look. The Cummins one you mentioned was also something I was looking at too, just because, again, Misha's been finished in his last 2 fights, so anything can happen.
Know your thoughts.
Where did you go with that one, James?
Who, Misha or Cummins?
Yeah.
I'm going Misha only because he's at Extreme Couture now. I think the knock I've had on Misha for this last probably since his career started was that you can't just train at Extreme Couture by yourself and expect to be a high-level UFC fighter. You need to get other looks, and he's finally done that. He's training with Vinny Magalesh, training with Ronnie Marks, getting good coaching with Ray Sefo and Eric Nicksack at Extreme Couture. Like, he's basically uprooted to Vegas now, which is great. So I think we could see some improvements because the talent level's there. It's just you can't not train with a good camp for certain fighters. And I think in his case, that's why, because you look at the last fight against Glover, that's a prime example. He looked like a fish out of water when it got on the ground. That's not something that should happen to a guy who has, a number of fights in the UFC. And Cummins, I mean, it's got to be the end of the road for him. I know he's back at Alliance now, training in San Diego. That's a good move for him. But no, I'm going to pick Misha. But at 425, no way I'm betting that. There's no way.
Yeah, there's no money going down on this. That's a fact. But I'll say this: Patrick Cummins is going to push Misha. And it's the perfect test for at this point in Misha's career. Misha, this goes to a very old saying, Sean, way back when I used to train at a place called Shaw Franco's. It was just housed with killers. Antonio Carvalho was there, Richard Nanku, the crazy little monkey they used to call him, Justin Bruckman. This was a camp that we all and then we started growing, almost merging with other camps in terms of training. Why? Because you can be the best in your gym. That's fine. You're the king of the mountain in your gym. Eventually, you got to become the king of your city, king of your province or state, king of your country. You're going to get to the UFC. Misha was always the best everywhere he trained. He had to go somewhere, not recently, but he had to go somewhere where he was going to get pushed, learn more, and stop being the best, because your confidence goes sky high when you get into fights, but then reality sets in. You got to have that confidence when you're in a training camp to be broken down, returned. Broken down, returned. Jason Perillo always talked about some of the fighters he would train, from whether it's Cyborg, whether it was Tito Ortiz, just people in general. You give the fighter the confidence when they need it, then you break it down. You break them down, you give it back to them. And I think Misha, where he's training now with Extreme Couture, may have learned that lesson where you're not going to always be the best in your gym. You got to put the work in harder than what you thought you were putting in before, and then dividends will be paid when you step into the octagon with a guy like Patrick Cummins. Patrick Cummins is, James did say that, could be the end of the line for him here. You just never know with a Patrick Cummins because he fools us every time.
You also have Artem Lobov against late replacement Michael Johnson. After the fiasco happened at 229, Michael Johnson slid in. On the surface, it's hard to see how Michael Johnson loses, and Artem Lobov will have his third straight loss. He's getting at least two more because he's Conor McGregor's boy. Now, not to take away from his tough run, because his tough 22 run was impressive, even after I think he lost to Baghdad by majority decision, but he won 3 straight fights and finished guys. But he's essentially had a 3-year run in the UFC because of who his buddy is. I mean, they had him fight Chris Avila, who is one of the worst fighters in UFC history.
Terrible.
In August of 2016. He fought Ishihara, who, again, not great in the UFC, but he was coming off of a pretty hot streak. That was a good win for Artem Lobov. And Ishihara's woes really started after that. So that was the best win he's got. Ishihara. If he can somehow beat Michael Johnson, he's good for 6-7 more fights in the UFC, I think, James.
Probably. Yeah, it pays to know people. Yeah, this is an interesting fight in terms of the styles and everything. Johnson getting that close win over Feely in his last fight. He's down at 45, the third fight at 45, I believe now, for Michael Johnson. I mean, Johnson should win this fight, but I don't think, I see people saying that Johnson's going to finish him. Lobov, you have to go back, I think it was 2011 or something crazy like that. He doesn't get knocked out at all. Johnson has knockout power, just ask Dustin Poirier, but it's not something that he's done recently. So this is something where I could see Johnson going the distance. So right now, Johnson minus 600. If you take Johnson prop bet wins by decision, it's minus 112. I think that's a good bet right there. I think Johnson probably beats Lobov by decision. Joe?
I think Johnson does emerge victorious. I don't think Lobov's just going to sit there and lie down. I think this fight does go the full 15 minutes. Michael Johnson has to simply use speed because you can expose a guy like Lobov who's going to be countering the majority of the fights. If you can use your speed and almost delay your full execution of your combinations, like you throw a 1-2, pause, then throw your hook, something of that nature, Michael Johnson, I think, will have his evening with Artem Lobov. But Lobov can take a beating. He just simply can constantly take a beating, and he can surprise a lot of people. Michael Johnson, if he fades at any one point in this fight, it could be a dangerous scenario against Lobov. So I will pick Johnson to win this fight, but got to be careful, be smart, be cognizant, don't get fatigued, execute your game plan.
We have a very high-level light heavyweight fight on the main event of this show. Volkan Ozdemir, who has often fought at heavyweight, taking on Anthony Smith, who moved up from middleweight. And you can draw a lot of parallels to these two guys. Volkan Ozdemir exploded onto the scene in 2017, beat St. Preux, Serkinov, and Manoa on his way to getting a title shot, which he lost I think it was in January. Anthony Smith has been around forever. He was fighting in Strikeforce in 2011. However, he moves up to light heavyweight, all of a sudden beats Rashad Evans and Shogun Rua. That's quite a way to get started at the light heavyweight division. And even at middleweight, he was doing fine until he ran into Santos. And even before then, quite frankly, he was doing fine before that outside of the UFC in Bellator. This was a guy who was 17-11, and he's come off and just had an insane revival of his career. And to some people, it's really the first time they knew who the hell Anthony Smith was, James. His career path is kind of unbelievable.
It is, and he's taken advantage of some good things. I think moving up to 205 was great. I mean, Smith used to fight at welterweight. That's, talk about, changing weight classes and things. That's pretty crazy, the fact that he's, now fighting at 205 pounds, but he looks way better. It's tough to really take a sample size, though, from what he's been able to accomplish. I know the wins were impressive, but, Rashad's retired. Shogun's probably retiring soon. It's a tough sample size to say, is he really a legitimate threat at 205 pounds? Well, we're going to find out on Saturday, taking on a guy in Volkan Ozdemir who, the win over OSP, I still think could have gone either way, but, I'll give him the win over Manu. I'll give him the win over Serkinov. Those are good wins. Lost to Cormier. So he's looked great. Trains at a good camp at Hard Knocks. Actually been training a bit up at TriStar. I don't know if you guys have been following him on social media. He's getting some different looks there ahead of this matchup, so that's good too. This is a coin flip. I mean, I could see either guy winning this fight, really. I don't, I think the line right now is, I think it has Volkan as a, Volkan's minus 190. I'm looking at 5 dimes, and Smith plus 165. But you never know, man. I mean, both these guys have knockout power. Both these guys are good everywhere it goes. My pick is Volkan, but if Smith pulls this off, it wouldn't surprise me. And one other thing I'll mention, I think the real resurgence for Smith's career was making that move out to Factory X. I really think him training with those guys out there, getting the coaching from Mark Montoya has paid dividends. And we've seen that in all of his fights. People are quick to write this guy off because of his loss to Thiago Santos, but he had a bad weight cut in that fight. That was in Brazil. I mean, a lot of circumstances played into that loss. And you know what? Losing to Thiago Santos ain't that bad. I mean, Santos just beat Eric Anders.
Ferreira.
Yeah, or Ferreira.
Bad losses.
Yeah, and outside of that, I mean, he's won all his fights. I mean, the fights where he had that losing streak, back when he was fighting in Strikeforce, I mean, that was at welterweight. So, he's really gone on quite the run. Sanchez was a good win. I mean, I'm really curious to see how this plays out because it'll tell us where both guys fit. And here's the crazy thing, guys. The winner of this fight probably could fight for the title next. That's how thin this division is right now.
And you have Dom Reyes really emerging in that division. James has spoken to both of these guys, and Dom Reyes for that matter. Anthony Smith has gone, I think, 13-2 in his last 15 fights. That's not something I saw coming after that Strikeforce run.
Give this guy some damn respect, whoever ranks him. Like, he's ranked 10th in the division.
He deserves to be way higher than that, I think.
So here's my take on the fight. Very, very, eerily similar to what James just said. But James, I'm going to say this. Sometimes we look at fights and what is our intrigue level in a fight, especially a big fight. You want it's too big. There's always a storyline there. This for me is an MMA fight for two different guys to have two different styles that bring different things to the octagon. This is one of those fights where I'm just going to say, you know what? Phone down, iPad down. Let me enjoy this one and let it unfold to see what becomes of the winner. Because the winner of this fight, if it's Volkan, he remains very relevant. If he loses, he's in trouble, even though the division is thin. And if Anthony Smith wins, oh my God, if he's not ranked in the top 3 after this, I don't know what to think. So this is a beautiful fight in my eyes where I can just sit there, boys, and be like, yeah, you know what? Referee, step out of the way, let them go.
I will have some sort of post-show either that night or the following day. We do have WWE Evolution post-show coverage this Sunday. Make sure you guys subscribe to that new channel, Fightful MMA and Boxing. Search it on YouTube. We will have a custom URL very soon. Within the next 3 weeks, we're going to have tons of content up there. We're really, really expanding for you guys. James, let the people know what you got going on this week.
I got a lot of stuff going on Fightful. We just interviewed Cynthia Calvillo last weekend. We also interviewed Macy Barber. Broke a little news there. Macy Barber not fighting Maya Stevenson anymore. She's fighting Hannah Cyphers. I might be interviewing Hannah tomorrow, so stay tuned for that on Fightful. But yeah, like I said, the Moncton card: Arjun Bowler, Andre Sukumta, Sarah Morris, Misha Serkinov, Nasrat Hakparat, Volkan Ozdemir, Anthony Smith, and a Prospects video. So like I said, we got you covered. You don't have to go to any other sites. If you guys are watching right now, don't even bother. We got you covered here at Fightful. Follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports. And great show today, guys. Appreciate it.
That Macy Barber interview is up on the new YouTube channel as we speak. So you never know what kind of news will be dropped there. Joe, what do you got going on? I'm guessing
James,
pizza and soccer.
Yeah, pretty much the basics there, James. In terms of interviewing Hannah, if you score it, good for you. She's a very sweetheart of a girl, very challenging interview. If you've ever seen her post-fight interviews at Titan, she doesn't speak.
Yeah, no, I know her manager basically sent me that note, and I love interviews like that because that means I have to do my job.
Yeah,
you know, I've worked with, I interviewed Felony Bennett. Okay, if you can interview Felony Bennett, you can interview anyone.
Yeah, she's just an extremely amazing individual. She just freezes. Just amazing. In terms of what am I doing? Yes, I will. I put it on the chat there. I don't care about this MMA stuff and these fights. That's not the real fight. The real fight is my mother-in-law's making 3 or 4 different homemade pizzas, Italian pizzas, that I have to figure out how I'm going to ingest.
Real Italian. I can't deal with it.
Oh, stone oven, this thin, just incredible. And then I've got to go coach the boys tonight. And then after that, I got to carve some pumpkins because my son's freaking out that if I don't put a Fortnite logo on a pumpkin and a Super Mario on another one, and then my wife wants me to drill through this Pinterest pictures and on the pumpkin, I'm stressed, guys. Stressed. Got to be the family man tonight.
Well, you guys will not be stressed. You will be relaxed when you subscribe to that new MMA channel we have. Do it. I'm not going to stop plugging it. Thank you guys so much. Leave us a thumbs up, subscribe. We are on podcast platforms everywhere. Help spread the word. We also have more MMA content on Fightful Select than ever. Check that out. We are out.